Section 1 of American Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matthew Reese. American Fairy Tales by L. Frank Baum. The Box of Robbers. No one intended to leave Martha alone that afternoon, but it happened that everyone was called away for one reason or another. Mrs. McFarland was attending the weekly card party held by the Women's Anti-Gambling League. Sister Nell's young man had called quite unexpectedly to take her for a long drive. Papa was at the office as usual. It was Mary Ann's day out. As for Emmeline, she certainly should have stayed in the house and looked after the little girl, but Emmeline had a restless nature. "Would you mind, miss, if I just crossed the alley to speak a word to Mrs. Carleton's girl?" she asked Martha. "'Course not," replied the child. "You'd better lock the back door, though, and take the key, for I shall be upstairs." "Oh, I'll do that, of course, miss," said the delighted maid, and ran away to spend the afternoon with her friend, leaving Martha quite alone in the big house, and locked in into the bargain. The girl read a few pages in her new book, sewed a few stitches in her embroidery, and started to play visiting with her 4 favorite dolls. Then she remembered that in the attic was a doll's playhouse that hadn't been used for months, so she decided she would dust it and put it in order. Filled with this idea, the girl climbed the winding stairs to the big room under the roof. It was well lighted by 3 dormer windows and was warm and pleasant. Around the walls were rows of boxes and trunks, piles of old carpeting, pieces of damaged furniture, bundles of discarded clothing and other odds and ends of more or less value. Every well-regulated house has an attic of this sort, so I need not describe it. The doll's house had been moved, but after a search Martha found it away over in a corner near the big chimney. She drew it out and noticed that behind it was a black wooden chest which Uncle Walter had sent over from Italy years and years ago, before Martha was born, in fact. Mamma had told her about it one day, how there was no key to it because Uncle Walter wished it to remain unopened until he returned home, and how this wandering uncle, who was a mighty hunter, had gone into Africa to hunt elephants and had never been heard from afterwards. The little girl looked at the chest curiously, now that it had by accident attracted her attention. It was quite big, bigger even than Mamma's traveling trunk, and was studded all over with tarnished brass-headed nails. It was heavy, too, for when Martha tried to lift one end of it she found she could not stir it a bit. But there was a place in the side of the cover for a key. She stooped to examine the lock, and saw that it would take a rather big key to open it. Then, as you may suspect, the little girl longed to open Uncle Walter's big box and see what was in it, for we are all curious, and little girls are just as curious as the rest of us. "I don't believe Uncle Walter'll ever come back," she thought. "Papa said once that some elephant must have killed him. If I only had a key." She stopped and clapped her little hands together gaily, as she remembered a big basket of keys on the shelf in the linen closet. They were of all sorts and sizes; perhaps one of them would unlock the mysterious chest. She flew down the stairs, found the basket, and returned with it to the attic. Then she sat down before the brass-studded box and began trying one key after another in the curious old lock. Some were too large, but most were too small. One would go into the lock but would not turn. Another stuck so fast that she feared for a time that she would never get it out again. But at last, when the basket was almost empty, an oddly shaped ancient brass key slipped easily into the lock. With a cry of joy, Martha turned the key with both hands. Then she heard a sharp click, and the next moment the heavy lid flew up of its own accord. The little girl leaned over the edge of the chest in an instant, and the sight that met her eyes caused her to start back in amazement. Slowly and carefully a man unpacked himself from the chest, stepped out upon the floor, stretched his limbs, and then took off his hat and bowed politely to the astonished child. He was tall and thin, and his face seemed badly tanned or sunburnt. Then another man emerged from the chest, yawning and rubbing his eyes like a sleepy schoolboy. He was of middle size, and his skin seemed as badly tanned as that of the first. While Martha stared open-mouthed at the remarkable sight, a third man crawled from the chest. He had the same complexion as his fellows, but was short and fat. All 3 were dressed in a curious manner. They wore short jackets of red velvet braided with gold, and knee breeches of sky blue satin with silver buttons. Over their stockings were laced wide ribbons of red and yellow and blue, while their hats had broad brims with high peaked crowns, from which fluttered yards of bright colored ribbons. They had big gold rings in their ears and rows of knives and pistols in their belts. Their eyes were black and glittering, and they wore long, fierce mustaches, curling at the ends like a pig's tail. "My, but you were heavy!" exclaimed the fat one, when he had pulled down his velvet jacket and brushed the dust from his sky blue breeches. "And you squeezed me all out of shape." "It was unavoidable, Luigi," responded the thin man, lightly. "The lid of the chest pressed me down upon you. Yet I tender you my regrets." "As for me," said the middle-sized man, carelessly rolling a cigarette and lighting it, "you must acknowledge that I have been your nearest friend for years, so do not be disagreeable." "You mustn't smoke in the attic," said Martha, recovering herself at the sight of the cigarette. "You might set the house on fire." The middle-sized man, who had not noticed her before, at this speech turned to the girl and bowed. "Since a lady requests it," said he, "I shall abandon my cigarette," and he threw it on the floor and extinguished it with his foot. "Who are you?" asked Martha, who until now had been too astonished to be frightened. "Permit us to introduce ourselves," said the thin man, flourishing his hat gracefully. "This is Luigi." The fat man nodded. "And this is Benny." The middle-sized man bowed. "And I am Victor. We are 3 bandits, Italian bandits." "Bandits?" cried Martha, with a look of horror. "Exactly. Perhaps in all the world there are not 3 other bandits so terrible and fierce as ourselves," said Victor proudly. "'Tis so," said the fat man, nodding gravely. "But it's wicked!" exclaimed Martha. "Yes, indeed," replied Victor. "We are extremely and tremendously wicked. Perhaps in all the world you could not find 3 men more wicked than those who now stand before you." "'Tis so," said the fat man, approvingly. "But you shouldn't be so wicked," said the girl. "It's naughty." Victor cast down his eyes and blushed. "Naughty?" gasped Benny, with a horrified look. "'Tis a hard word," said Luigi, sadly, and buried his face in his hands. "I little thought," murmured Victor, in a voice broken by emotion, "ever to be so reviled, and by a lady. Yet perhaps you spoke thoughtlessly. You must consider, miss, that our wickedness has an excuse. For how are we to be bandits, let me ask, unless we are wicked?" Martha was puzzled, and shook her head thoughtfully. Then she remembered something. "You can't remain bandits any longer," said she, "because you are now in America." "America?" cried the 3 together. "Certainly. You are on Prairie Avenue in Chicago. Uncle Walter sent you here from Italy in this chest." The bandits seemed greatly bewildered by this announcement. Luigi sat down on an old chair with a broken rocker and wiped his forehead with a yellow silk handkerchief. Benny and Victor fell back upon the chest and looked at her with pale faces and staring eyes. When he had somewhat recovered himself, Victor spoke. "Your Uncle Walter has greatly wronged us," he said, reproachfully. "He has taken us from our beloved Italy, where bandits are highly respected, and brought us to a strange country, where we shall not know whom to rob or how much to ask for a ransom." "'Tis so," said the fat man, slapping his leg sharply. "And we had won such fine reputations in Italy," said Benny, regretfully. "Perhaps Uncle Walter wanted to reform you," suggested Martha. "Are there, then, no bandits in Chicago?" asked Victor. "Well," replied the girl, blushing in her turn, "we do not call them bandits." "Then what shall we do for a living?" inquired Benny, despairingly. "A great deal can be done in a big American city," said the child. "My father is a lawyer." The bandit shuddered. "And my mother's cousin is a police inspector." "Ah," said Victor, "that is good employment. The police need to be inspected, especially in Italy." "Everywhere," added Benny. "Then you could do other things," continued Martha, encouragingly. "You could be motormen on trolley cars, or clerks in a department store. Some people even become aldermen to earn a living." The bandits shook their heads sadly. "We are not fitted for such work," said Victor. "Our business is to rob." Martha tried to think. "It is rather hard to get positions in the gas office," she said. "But you might become politicians." "No!" cried Benny, with sudden fierceness. "We must not abandon our high calling. Bandits we have always been, and bandits we must remain." "'Tis so," agreed the fat man. "Even in Chicago there must be people to rob," remarked Victor, with cheerfulness. Martha was distressed. "I think they have all been robbed," she objected. "Then we can rob the robbers, for we have experience and talent beyond the ordinary," said Benny. "Oh dear," moaned the girl. "Why did Uncle Walter ever send you here in this chest?" The bandits became interested. "That is what we should like to know," declared Victor, eagerly. "But no one will ever know, for Uncle Walter was lost while hunting elephants in Africa," she continued, with conviction. "Then we must accept our fate and rob to the best of our ability," said Victor. "So long as we are faithful to our beloved profession we need not be ashamed." "'Tis so," cried the fat man. "Brothers, we will begin now. Let us rob the house we are in." "Good!" shouted the others, and sprang to their feet. Benny turned threateningly upon the child. "Remain here," he commanded. "If you stir one step your blood will be on your own head." Then he added, in a gentler voice: "Don't be afraid. That's the way all bandits talk to their captives. But of course we wouldn't hurt a young lady under any circumstances." "Of course not," said Victor. The fat man drew a big knife from his belt and flourished it about his head. "'S blood!" he ejaculated, fiercely. "'Sbananas!" cried Benny, in a terrible voice. "Confusion to our foes!" hissed Victor. And then the three bent themselves nearly double and crept stealthily down the stairway with cocked pistols in their hands and glittering knives between their teeth, leaving Martha trembling with fear and too horrified to even cry for help. How long she remained alone in the attic she never knew, but finally she heard the cat-like tread of the returning bandits and saw them coming up the stairs in single file. All bore heavy loads of plunder in their arms, and Luigi was balancing a mince pie on the top of a pile of her mother's best evening dresses. Victor came next with an armful of bric-a-brac, a brass candelabra, and the parlor clock. Benny had the family Bible, the basket of silverware from the sideboard, a copper kettle, and Papa's fur overcoat. "Oh, joy!" said Victor, putting down his load. "It is pleasant to rob once more." "Oh, ecstasy!" said Benny, but he let the kettle drop on his toe and immediately began dancing around in anguish, while he muttered queer words in the Italian language. "We have much wealth," continued Victor, holding the mince pie, while Luigi added his spoils to the heap, "and all from one house. This America must be a rich place." With a dagger he then cut himself a piece of the pie and handed the remainder to his comrades, whereupon all three sat upon the floor and consumed the pie while Martha looked on sadly. "We should have a cave," remarked Benny, "for we must store our plunder in a safe place. Can you tell us of a secret cave?" he asked Martha. "There's a Mammoth Cave," she answered, "but it's in Kentucky. You would be obliged to ride on the cars a long time to get there." The three bandits looked thoughtful and munched their pie silently, but the next moment they were startled by the ringing of the electric doorbell, which was heard plainly even in the remote attic. "What's that?" demanded Victor in a hoarse voice, as the three scrambled to their feet with drawn daggers. Martha ran to the window and saw it was only the postman, who had dropped a letter in the box and gone away again. But the incident gave her an idea of how to get rid of her troublesome bandits. So she began wringing her hands as if in great distress, and cried out, "It's the police!" The robbers looked at one another with genuine alarm, and Luigi asked, tremblingly, "Are there many of them?" "112!" exclaimed Martha, after pretending to count them. "Then we are lost," declared Benny, "for we could never fight so many and live." "Are they armed?" inquired Victor, who was shivering as if cold. "Oh, yes," said she. "They have guns and swords and pistols and axes and—" "And what?" demanded Luigi. "And cannons!" The three wicked ones groaned aloud, and Benny said in a hollow voice, "I hope they will kill us quickly, and not put us to the torture. I have been told these Americans are painted Indians, who are bloodthirsty and terrible." "'Tis so," gasped the fat man with a shudder. Suddenly Martha turned from the window. "You are my friends, are you not?" she asked. "We are devoted," answered Victor. "We adore you!" cried Benny. "We would die for you," added Luigi, thinking he was about to die anyway. "Then I will save you," said the girl. "How?" asked the three, with one voice. "Get back into the chest," she said. "I will then close the lid so they will be unable to find you." They looked around the room in a dazed and irresolute way, but she exclaimed: "You must be quick! They will soon be here to arrest you." Then Luigi sprang into the chest and lay flat upon the bottom. Benny tumbled in next and packed himself in the back side. Victor followed, after pausing to kiss her hand to the girl in a graceful manner. Then Martha ran up to press down the lid, but could not make it catch. "You must squeeze down," she said to them. Luigi groaned. "I am doing my best, miss," said Victor, who was nearest the top; "but although we fitted in very nicely before, the chest now seems rather small for us." "'Tis so," came the muffled voice of the fat man from the bottom. "I know what takes up the room," said Benny. "What?" inquired Victor, anxiously. "The pie," returned Benny. "'Tis so," came from the bottom, in faint accents. Then Martha sat upon the lid and pressed it down with all her weight. To her great delight the lock caught, and, springing down, she exerted all her strength and turned the key. This story should teach us not to interfere in matters that do not concern us. For, had Martha refrained from opening Uncle Walter's mysterious chest, she would not have been obliged to carry downstairs all the plunder the robbers had brought into the attic. End of The Box of Robbers. Recording by Matthew Reese. Davenport, Iowa. Section 2 of American Fairy Tales by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matthew Reese. The Glass Dog. An accomplished wizard once lived on the top floor of a tenement house, and passed his time in thoughtful study and studious thought. What he didn't know about wizardry was hardly worth knowing, for he possessed all the books and recipes of all the wizards who had lived before him, and, moreover, he had invented several wizardments himself. This admirable person would have been completely happy but for the numerous interruptions to his studies caused by folk who came to consult him about their troubles, in which he was not interested, and by the loud knocks of the iceman, the milkman, the baker's boy, the laundryman, and the peanut woman. He never dealt with any of these people, but they rapped at his door every day to see him about this or that, or to try to sell him their wares. Just when he was most deeply interested in his books, or engaged in watching the bubbling of a cauldron, there would come a knock at his door. And after sending the intruder away, he always found he had lost his train of thought, or ruined his compound. At length these interruptions aroused his anger, and he decided he must have a dog to keep people away from his door. He didn't know where to find a dog, but in the next room lived a poor glass blower with whom he had a slight acquaintance. So he went into the man's apartment and asked: "Where can I find a dog?" "What sort of a dog?" inquired the glass blower. "A good dog. One that will bark at people and drive them away. One that will be no trouble to keep and won't expect to be fed. One that has no fleas and is neat in his habits. One that will obey me when I speak to him. In short, a good dog," said the wizard. "Such a dog is hard to find," returned the glass blower, who was busy making a blue glass flower pot with a pink glass rosebush in it, having green glass leaves and yellow glass roses. The wizard watched him thoughtfully. "Why cannot you blow me a dog out of glass?" he asked, presently. "I can," declared the glass blower, "but it would not bark at people, you know." "Oh, I'll fix that easily enough," replied the other. "If I could not make a glass dog bark, I would be a mighty poor wizard." "Very well. If you can use a glass dog I'll be pleased to blow one for you. Only you must pay for my work." "Certainly," agreed the wizard. "But I have none of that horrid stuff you call money. You must take some of my wares in exchange." The glass blower considered the matter for a moment. "Could you give me something to cure my rheumatism?" he asked. "Oh, yes, easily." "Then it's a bargain. I'll start the dog at once. What color of glass shall I use?" "Pink is a pretty color. The Queen of Quock." "If I must marry at all," said the king, after a moment's thought, I prefer to marry Nyana, the armorer's daughter."
"She is too poor,"
replied the counselor. "Her teeth are pearls, her eyes are amethysts, and her hair is gold," declared the little king.
"True, your majesty, but consider that your wife's wealth must be used. How would Nyana look after you have pulled her teeth of pearls, plucked out her amethyst eyes, and shaved her golden head?"
The boy shuddered. "Have your own way," he said, despairingly. "Only let the lady be as dainty as possible, and a good playfellow."
"We shall do our best,"
returned the chief counselor, and went away to advertise throughout the neighboring kingdoms for a wife for the boy king of Quock. There were so many applicants for the privilege of marrying the little king that it was decided to put him up at auction, in order that the largest possible sum of money should be brought into the kingdom. So on the day appointed the ladies gathered at the palace from all the surrounding kingdoms, from Bilkon, Mulgravia, Junkum, and even as far away as the Republic of Macvelt. The chief counselor came to the palace early in the morning and had the king's face washed and his hair combed, and then he patted the inside of the crown with old newspapers to make it small enough to fit his majesty's head. It was a sorry-looking crown, having many big and little holes in it where the jewels had once been, and it had been neglected and knocked around until it was quite battered and tarnished. Yet, as the counselor said, it was the king's crown, and it was quite proper he should wear it on the solemn occasion of his auction. Like all boys, be they kings or paupers, his majesty had torn and soiled his one suit of clothes, so that they were hardly presentable, and there was no money to buy new ones. Therefore the counselor wound the old ermine robe around the king and sat him upon the stool in the middle of the otherwise empty audience chamber. And around him stood all the courtiers and politicians and hangers-on of the kingdom, consisting of such people as were too proud or lazy to work for a living. There was a great number of them, you may be sure, and they made an imposing appearance. Then the doors of the audience chamber were thrown open, and the wealthy ladies who aspired to being Queen of Quock came trooping in. The king looked them over with much anxiety, and decided they were each and all old enough to be his grandmother, and ugly enough to scare away the crows from the royal cornfields, after which he lost interest in them. But the rich ladies never looked at the poor little king squatting upon his stool. They gathered at once about the chief counselor, who acted as auctioneer.
"How much am I offered for the coronet of the Queen of Quock?"
asked the counselor in a loud voice.
"Where is the coronet?"
inquired a fussy lady who had just buried her 9th husband, and was worth several millions.
"There isn't any coronet at present," explained the chief counselor. "But whoever bids highest will have the right to wear one, and she can then buy it."
"Oh," said the fussy old lady. "I see," Gladys, laughing until her eyes were moist with tears. The clown looked sulky and sat down upon a chair so she couldn't see his back. "I'm not the only thing in the book," he remarked, crossly. This reminded her to turn another page, and she had scarcely noted that it contained the picture of a monkey when the animal sprang from the book with a great crumpling of paper and landed upon the window-seat beside her. "Hee hee hee hee!" chattered the creature, springing to the girl's shoulder and then to the center table. "This is great fun! Now I can be a real monkey instead of a picture of one." "Real monkeys can't talk," said Jane Gladys, reprovingly. "How do you know? Have you ever been one yourself?" inquired the animal, and then he laughed loudly, and the clown laughed too, as if he enjoyed the remark. The girl was quite bewildered by this time. She thoughtlessly turned another leaf, and before she had time to look twice a gray donkey leapt from the book and stumbled from the window-seat to the floor with a great clatter. "You're clumsy enough, I'm sure," said the child, indignantly, for the beast had nearly upset her. "Clumsy? And why not?" demanded the donkey, with angry voice. "If the fool artist had drawn you out of perspective as he did me, I guess you'd be clumsy yourself." "What's wrong with you?" asked Jane Gladys. "My front and rear legs on the left side are nearly 6 inches too short. That's what's the matter. If that artist didn't know how to draw properly, why did he try to make a donkey at all?" "I don't know," replied the child, seeing an answer was expected. "I can hardly stand up," grumbled the donkey, "and the least little thing will topple me over." "Don't mind that," said the monkey, making a spring at the chandelier and swinging from it by his tail until Jane Gladys feared he would knock all the globes off. "The same artist has made my ears as big as that clown's, and everyone knows a monkey hasn't any ears to speak of, much less to draw." "He should be prosecuted," remarked the clown, gloomily. "I haven't any back." Jane Gladys looked from one to the other with a puzzled expression upon her sweet face, and turned another page of the book. Swift as a flash there sprang over her shoulder a tawny, spotted leopard, which landed upon the back of a big leather armchair and turned upon the others with a fierce movement. The monkey climbed to the top of the chandelier and chattered with fright. The donkey tried to run and straightway tipped over on his left side. The clown grew paler than ever, but he sat still in his chair and gave a low whistle of surprise. The leopard crouched upon the back of the chair, lashed his tail from side to side, and glared at all of them, by turns, including Jane Gladys. "Which of us are you going to attack first?" asked the donkey, trying hard to get up on his feet again. "I can't attack any of you," snarled the leopard. "The artist made my mouth shut, so I haven't any teeth, and he forgot to make my claws. But I'm a frightful-looking creature nevertheless, am I not?" "Oh, yes," said the clown, indifferently. "I suppose you're frightful-looking enough. But if you have no teeth nor claws, we don't mind your looks at all." This so annoyed the leopard that he growled horribly. Iowa. Section 6 of American Fairy Tales by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matthew Reese. The Laughing Hippopotamus. On one of the upper branches of the Congo River lived an ancient and aristocratic family of hippopotamuses, which boasted a pedigree dating back beyond the days of Noah, beyond the existence of mankind, far into the dim ages when the world was new. They had always lived upon the banks of this same river, so that every curve and sweep of its waters, every pit and shallow of its bed, every rock and stump and wallow upon its bank was as familiar to them as their own mothers. And they are living there yet, I suppose. Not long ago, the queen of this tribe of hippopotamuses had a child which she named Keo, because it was so fat and round. Still, that you may not be misled, I will say that in the hippopotamus language, Keo, properly translated, means fat and lazy, instead of fat and round. However, no one called the queen's attention to this error, because her tusks were monstrous long and sharp, and she thought Keo the sweetest baby in the world. He was, indeed, all right for a hippopotamus. He rolled and played in the soft mud of the river bank, and waddled inland to nibble the leaves of the wild cabbage that grew there, and was happy and contented from morning till night. And he was the jolliest hippopotamus that ancient family had ever known. His little red eyes were forever twinkling with fun, and he laughed his merry laugh on all occasions, whether there was anything to laugh at or not. Therefore, the black people who dwelt in that region called him Ippy, the Jolly One, although they dared not come anigh him on account of his fierce mother and his equally fierce uncles and aunts and cousins, who lived in a vast colony upon the river bank. And while these black people who lived in the little villages scattered among the trees dared not openly attack the royal family of hippopotamuses, they were amazingly fond of eating hippopotamus meat whenever they could get it. This was no secret to the hippopotamuses, and, again, when the blacks managed to catch these animals alive, they had a trick of riding them through the jungles as if they were horses, thus reducing them to a condition of slavery. Therefore, having these things in mind, whenever the tribe of hippopotamuses smelled the oily odor of black people, they were accustomed to charge upon them furiously, and if by chance they overtook one of the enemy, they would rip him with their sharp tusks or stamp him into the earth with their huge feet. It was continual warfare between the hippopotamuses and the black people. Gooey lived in one of the little villages of the blacks. He was the son of the chief's brother and grandson of the village sorcerer, the latter being an aged man known as the Boneless Wonder, because he could twist himself into as many coils as a serpent, and had no bones to hinder his bending his flesh into any position. This made him walk in a wobbly fashion, but the black people had great respect for him. Gooey's hut was made of branches. "How delightful!" exclaimed Clarabelle, who was truly enraptured. "You are certainly a most clever sorcerer, as well as a considerate compounder." And she held out her hand for the box. "Ahem!" said the wise one. "A check, please." "Oh, yes, to be sure. How stupid of me to forget it," she returned. He considerately retained the box in his own hand while she signed a check for a large amount of money, after which he allowed her to hold the box herself. "Are you sure you have made them strong enough?" she inquired, anxiously. It usually takes a great deal to affect me." "My only fear," replied Dr. Daws, "is that I have made them too strong, for this is the first time I have ever been called upon to prepare these wonderful confections." "Don't worry," said Claribel. "The stronger they act the better I shall act myself." She went away after saying this, but stopping in at a dry goods store to shop she forgot the precious box in her new interest and left it lying on the ribbon counter. Then little Bessie Bostwick came to the counter to buy a hair ribbon and laid her parcels beside the box. When she went away she gathered up the box with her other bundles and trotted off home with it. Bessie never knew until after she had hung her coat in the hall closet and counted up her parcels that she had one too many. Then she opened it and exclaimed, "Why, it's a box of candy! Someone must have mislaid it. But it is too small a matter to worry about. There are only a few pieces." So she dumped the contents of the box into a bonbon dish that stood upon the hall table, and picking out the chocolate piece—she was fond of chocolates—ate it daintily while she examined her purchases. These were not many, for Bessie was only 12 years old and was not yet trusted by her parents to expend much money at the stores. But while she tried on the hair ribbon she suddenly felt a great desire to play upon the piano, and the desire at last became so overpowering that she went into the parlor and opened the instrument. The little girl had, with infinite pains, contrived to learn 2 pieces, which she usually executed with a jerky movement of her right hand and a left hand that forgot to keep up and so made dreadful discords. But under the influence of the chocolate bonbon she sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, producing such exquisite harmony that she was filled with amazement at her own performance. That was the prelude, however. The next moment she dashed into Beethoven's 7th Sonata and played it magnificently. Her mother, hearing the unusual burst of melody, came downstairs to see what musical guest had arrived, but when she discovered it was her own little daughter who was playing so divinely she had an attack of palpitation of the heart, to which she was subject, and sat down upon a sofa until it should pass away. Meanwhile Bessie played one piece after another with untiring energy. She loved music, and now found that all she need do was sit at the piano and listen, and watch her hands twinkle over the keyboard. Twilight deepened in the room, and Bessie's father came home and hung up his hat and overcoat and placed his umbrella in the rack. "Then at your proper time my scythe will mow you down." "I forgot your scythe," said Jim, thoughtfully. Then a spirit of mischief came into the boy's head, for he happened to think that the present opportunity to have fun would never occur again. He tied Father Time to his uncle's hitching post that he might not escape, and then crossed the road to the corner grocery. The grocer had scolded Jim that very morning for stepping into a basket of turnips by accident, so the boy went to the back end of the grocery and turned on the faucet of the molasses barrel. "That'll make a nice mess when Time starts the molasses running all over the floor," said Jim with a laugh. A little further down the street was a barber shop, and sitting in the barber's chair Jim saw the man that all the boys declared was the meanest man in town. He certainly did not like the boys, and the boys knew it. The barber was in the act of shampooing this person when Time was captured. Jim ran to the drugstore, and getting a bottle of mucilage, he returned and poured it over the ruffled hair of the unpopular citizen. "That'll probably surprise him when he wakes up," thought Jim. Near by was the schoolhouse. Jim entered it and found that only a few of the pupils were assembled, but the teacher sat at his desk, stern and frowning as usual. Taking a piece of chalk, Jim marked upon the blackboard in big letters the following words: "Every scholar is requested to yell the minute he enters the room. He will also please throw his books at the teacher's head. Signed, Professor Sharp." "That ought to raise a nice rumpus," murmured the mischief maker as he walked away. On the corner stood Policeman Mulligan, talking with old Miss Scrapple, the worst gossip in town, who always delighted in saying something disagreeable about her neighbors. Jim thought this opportunity was too good to lose. So he took off the policeman's cap and brass-buttoned coat and put them on Miss Scrapple, while the lady's feathered and ribboned hat he placed jauntily on the policeman's head. The effect was so comical that the boy laughed aloud, and as a good many people were standing near the corner, Jim decided that Miss Scrapple and Officer Mulligan would create a sensation when Time started upon his travels. Then the young cowboy remembered his prisoner, and walking back to the hitching post he came within 3 feet of it and saw Father Time still standing patiently within the coils of the lasso. He looked angry and annoyed, however, and growled out, "Well, when do you intend to release me?" "I've been thinking about that ugly scythe of yours," said Jim. "What about it?" asked Father Time. "Perhaps if I let you go you'll swing it at me the first thing, to be revenged," replied the boy. Father Time gave him a severe look, but said, "I've known boys for thousands of years, and of course I know they're mischievous and reckless. But I like boys because they grow up to be men and people my world. Now, if a man had caught me by accident, as you did, I could have scared him into letting me go instantly, but boys are harder to scare. I don't know as I blame you. I was a boy myself long ago when the world was new. But surely you've had enough fun with me by this time, and now I hope you'll show the respect that is due to old age. Let me go, and in return I will promise to forget all about my capture. The incident won't do much harm, anyway, for no one will ever know that time has halted the last 3 hours or so." "All right," said Jim, cheerfully, "since you've So they left the village and hurried away to the farm on the hill, where they broke down the door and turned everything topsy-turvy until they had discovered the gold in the woodbox and the teapot. It did not take them long to make this into bundles, which they slung upon their backs and carried off, and it was probably because they were in a great hurry that they did not stop to put the house in order again. Presently the good woman and her husband came up the hill from the village with their arms full of bundles and followed by a crowd of small boys who had been hired to help carry the purchases. Then followed others, youngsters and country louts, attracted by the wealth and prodigality of the pair, who, from simple curiosity, trailed along behind like the tail of a comet, and helped swell the concourse into a triumphal procession. Last of all came Guggins, the shopkeeper, carrying with much tenderness a new silk dress, which was to be paid for when they reached the house, all the money they had taken to the village having been lavishly expended. The farmer, who had formerly been a modest man, was now so swelled with pride that he tipped the rim of his hat over his left ear and smoked a big cigar that was fast making him ill. His wife strutted along beside him like a peacock, enjoying the full homage and respect her wealth had won from those who formerly deigned not to notice her, and glancing from time to time at the admiring procession in the rear. But, alas for their new-born pride! When they reached the farmhouse they found the door broken in, the furniture strewn in all directions, and their treasure stolen to the very last gold piece. The crowd grinned and made slighting remarks of a personal nature, and Guggins, the shopkeeper, demanded in a loud voice the money for the silk dress he had brought. Then the woman whispered to her husband to run and pump some more gold while she kept the crowd quiet, and he obeyed quickly. But after a few moments he returned with a white face to tell her the pump was dry, and not a gold piece could now be coaxed from the spout. The procession marched back to the village laughing and jeering at the farmer and his wife, who had pretended to be so rich, and some of the boys were naughty enough to throw stones at the house from the top of the hill. Mr. Guggins carried away his dress after severely scolding the woman for deceiving him, and when the couple at last found themselves alone, their pride had turned to humiliation, and their joy to bitter grief. Just before sundown the woman dried her eyes and, having resumed her ordinary attire, went to the brook for water. When she came to the flat stone she saw the king beetle sitting upon it. "The well is dry!" she cried out, angrily. "Yes," answered the beetle, calmly. "You have pumped from it all the gold my people could find." "But we are now ruined," said the woman, sitting down in the path, beginning to weep, "for robbers have stolen from us every penny we possessed." "I'm sorry," returned the beetle, "but it is your own fault. Had you not made so great a show of your wealth, no one would have suspected you possessed a treasure, or thought to rob you. As it is, you have merely lost the gold which others have lost before you. It will probably be lost many times more before the world comes to an end." "But what are we to do now?" she asked. "What did you do before I gave you the money?" "We worked." In the boat were men. The great bear had never seen such creatures before, and therefore advanced toward the boat, sniffing the strange scent, with aroused curiosity, and wondering whether he might take them for friends or foes, food or carrion. When the king came near the water's edge a man stood up in the boat, and with a queer instrument made a loud bang. The polar bear felt a shock, his brain became numb, his thoughts deserted him, his great limbs shook and gave way beneath him, and his body fell heavily upon the hard ice. That was all he remembered for a time. When he awoke he was smarting with pain on every inch of his huge bulk, for the men had cut away his hide with its glorious white hair and carried it with them to a distant ship. Above him circled thousands of his friends, the gulls, wondering if their benefactor were really dead, and it was proper to eat him. But when they saw him raise his head and groan and tremble, they knew he still lived, and one of them said to his comrades, "The wolves were right. The king is a great magician, for even men cannot kill him. But he suffers for lack of covering. Let us repay his kindness to us by each giving him as many feathers as we can spare." This idea pleased the gulls. One after another they plucked with their beaks the softest feathers from under their wings and, flying down, dropped them gently upon the body of the king of the polar bears. Then they called to him, in a chorus: "Courage, friend! Our feathers are as soft and beautiful as your own shaggy hair. They will guard you from the cold winds and warm you while you sleep. Have courage, then, and live." And the king of the polar bears had courage to bear his pain, and lived, and was strong again. The feathers grew as they had grown upon the bodies of the birds and covered him as his own hair had done. Mostly they were pure white in color, but some from the gray gulls gave his majesty a slightly mottled appearance. The rest of that summer and all through the 6 months of night the king left his icy cavern only to fish or catch seals for food. He felt no shame at his feathery covering, but it was still strange to him, and he avoided meeting any of his brother bears. During this period of retirement he thought much of the men who had harmed him, and remembered the way they had made the great bang, and he decided it was best to keep away from such fierce creatures. Thus he added to his store of wisdom. When the moon fell away from the sky and the sun came to make the icebergs glitter with the gorgeous tintings of the rainbow, 2 of the polar bears arrived at the king's cavern to ask his advice about the hunting season. But when they saw his great body covered with feathers instead of hair, they began to laugh, and one said: "Our mighty king has become a bird. Who ever before heard of a feathered polar bear?" Then the king gave way to wrath. He advanced upon them with deep growls and stately tread, and with one blow of his monstrous paw stretched the mocker lifeless at his feet. The other ran away to his fellows and carried the news of the king's strange appearance. The result was a meeting of all the polar bears upon a broad field of ice, where they talked gravely of the remarkable change that had come upon their monarch. "He is in reality no longer a bear," said one. He spitefully snapped the butterfly with his finger and nearly broke its beautiful wing, for he forgot that Chinese boys had once mocked him and only remembered his hatred for American boys. The butterfly became very indignant at this abuse from the mandarin. It refused to eat its molasses, and sulked all the evening, for it had grown to hate the mandarin almost as much as the mandarin hated children. When morning came it was still trembling with indignation, but the mandarin cried out: "Make haste, miserable slave, for today you must change 4 children into pigs to make up for yesterday." The butterfly did not reply. His little black eyes were sparkling wickedly, and no sooner had he dipped his feet into the magic compound than he flew full in the mandarin's face and touched him upon his ugly, flat forehead. Soon after, a gentleman came into the room for his laundry. The mandarin was not there, but running around the place was a repulsive, scrawny pig, which squealed most miserably. The butterfly flew away to a brook and washed from its feet all traces of the magic compound. When night came, it slept in a rose bush. End of The Mandarin and the Butterfly. Recording by Matthew Reese, Davenport, Iowa. End of American Fairy Tales by L. Frank Baum.